you wake up in the dark. Not because an alarm went off. Not because your phone lit up. You wake up because your body decided it was time. Your eyes open on their own slowly, without the chemical jolt of caffeine or the blaring shock of a ringtone. The world around you is quiet and cool and smells like earth and smoke. For most of human history, this was just morning. There was no 8-hour sleep target. No sleep hygiene checklist pinned above someone's bed. No blue light filter. No melatonin gummy. For roughly 3,000,000 years of Homo sapiens history, and millions of years before that, if you count our hominin ancestors, sleep was not a problem to be optimized. It was simply something you did folded into the rhythms of fire and darkness, and the slow turn of seasons. And the more researchers have dug into what that actually looked like, the more they've found something that should feel quietly alarming to the average modern person sitting awake at midnight staring at a ceiling. Your ancestors may have slept better than you do. Let's be careful about what we're claiming here, because this is an area where popular science has generated some genuinely misleading ideas. Sleep researchers have been studying this question seriously for only a few decades, and the evidence comes from multiple directions: skeletal remains, ethnographic observation of contemporary foraging societies, comparative primate sleep studies, and careful analysis of circadian biology. None of these sources alone gives us a complete picture, but taken together they point towards something real. Jerome Siegel is a sleep researcher at UCLA who spent years asking a deceptively simple question: how do people sleep when there is no electricity? In a landmark study published in 2015 Inches, Current Biology, he and his colleagues attached wrist monitors to members of 3 small-scale societies living without electric light. They looked at the Hadza of northern Tanzania, the San of the Kalahari in Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia's Amazon basin. These are contemporary people living modern lives, not fossils, not stand-ins for the Stone Age. But they do share one crucial condition with your ancient ancestors: when the sun goes down, the light goes away. What Siegel's team found surprised a lot of people. These communities were not sleeping 8 hours or more. The average across all 3 groups was somewhere between 6 and 7.5 hours of actual sleep per night. That's less than what most sleep scientists recommend, and less than what most people in industrialized countries say they aim for, even if they rarely achieve it. But here's the part that gets complicated: the people in Siegel's study showed almost no insomnia. They had almost no reported sleep disorders. They fell asleep relatively quickly. They woke up without apparent difficulty. And they did this every single night, with remarkable consistency. Their sleep also had a shape that modern sleep almost never does. In all 3 groups, people did not go to sleep the moment it got dark. There was a period of 2 to 3 hours between sunset and sleep onset, what Siegel called a temperature-dependent delay. The body's core temperature drops in the evening, and that drop is one of the biological triggers for sleep. In the absence of artificial heat, this process plays out naturally. People sat around fires. They talked. They told stories. They processed the day. And then when their bodies were ready, roughly 2 to 3 hours after dark, they slept. They also woke up before or around sunrise, not because they had to, but because the light and the warming temperature signaled the body that sleep was done. From first light, most members of these groups were awake and active within about an hour. There was no lying in bed for 20 minutes trying to remember whether you turned off the stove. There was no half-awake scrolling. There was dark, and then there was light, and the body moved between them with very little friction. Now here is where things get genuinely strange. For much of Western history, starting roughly in the medieval period and persisting well into the early modern era, the people keeping written records about sleep were describing something completely different. A historian at Virginia Tech named A. Roger E. Kirch spent 2 decades combing through court records, diaries, medical texts, and literary sources from across medieval and early modern Europe. What he found, and published in the 2000 Model Sleep, people in pre-industrial Europe did not typically sleep in one long block. They slept in 2. There was a first sleep, which lasted roughly 3 to 4 hours, beginning not long after dark. Then there was a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night, lasting anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. And then came a second sleep, which lasted until dawn or just after. That waking interval was not considered an affliction. It was simply a part of the night. People used it to pray, to have sex, to interpret dreams, which were considered spiritually significant during that liminal hour, to check on children, to visit neighbors in warmer seasons, or simply to lie quietly and think. Kirch found a word used in several of these sources, the watch. Not keeping watch against danger, just watching. Being awake inside the night without agenda. What killed bimodal sleep, according to Kirch, was artificial lighting. As candles became cheaper, as gas lamps appeared, as coffee became widely available in European cities, the pressure to stay awake later in the evening increased. By the time electric lighting arrived in the late 19th century, the consolidated single-block sleep that most of us consider natural had become the dominant norm. And with it, for many people, came the experience of waking in the night, feeling that something was wrong. Researchers like Russell Foster at Oxford Sleep and Circadian Neuroscience Institute have pointed out that the way we culturally frame middle-of-the-night waking has real consequences. When someone wakes at 3 a.m. and lies there anxious for an hour, that anxiety is itself a physiological event. It elevates cortisol. It makes returning to sleep harder. But if that same person had lived in 15th century England, they would have been doing nothing unusual. The experience would have been neutral. The suffering is not built into the waking. It's built into the interpretation. Let's go further back. Past written records, past the medieval period, past agriculture entirely. Let's try to reconstruct what sleep might have looked like for a human being living in the Upper Paleolithic, the long stretch of human prehistory running from roughly 5,000 to 12,000 years ago. Your person. Let's call them you, because that's what you are. A body with the same basic biology you carry today did not have a private bedroom. Almost certainly they slept in a group. The evidence for this comes from multiple angles. The social structure of contemporary foraging peoples, the remnants of ancient hearths, and what we know about how sleep itself functions under cold and predator pressure. Matthew Walker, a sleep scientist at UC Berkeley and the author of Why We Sleep, has written extensively about the evolutionary logic of group sleep. If you sleep alone in an exposed environment, the risk is obvious. You are unconscious, immobile, and making noise. But if you sleep in a group, you create what Walker and others have described as a natural sentinel effect. Not everyone falls asleep at exactly the same time. Not everyone's sleep cycles align perfectly. In any given hour of the night, there is a reasonable statistical probability that someone is in a lighter sleep phase and more likely to rouse at a sound. The group collectively maintains a kind of distributed vigilance, even while sleeping. This may also explain something about human sleep architecture that distinguishes it from other great apes. Humans spend a proportionally larger fraction of their sleep in REM sleep, the stage associated with dreaming, emotional processing, and memory consolidation relative to total sleep time than chimpanzees or gorillas do. Researchers, including Jerome Siegel, have proposed that our ancestors, by shifting from sleeping in trees to sleeping on the ground in groups with fire, could afford shorter but more efficient sleep. They could drop more quickly into the restorative stages without spending as long in the lighter transitional phases. The safety of the group made deeper sleep possible. The fire itself was not a minor detail. A lit fire does several things simultaneously. It provides warmth, which helps regulate the body temperature drop that triggers and maintains sleep. It provides light, which keeps the transition zone between activity and sleep, that 2-hour window Siegel observed, socially active. And it provides psychological reassurance. There is something in the way a controlled fire sounds and smells that the human nervous system appears to find genuinely calming. Psychologist Michael Burns, who studies the calming effect of firelight on human physiology, has found that exposure to firelight tends to reduce blood pressure and encourage a kind of restful, low-arousal sociality, what he calls the relaxation response. Your ancestors were not gathered around those fires by accident. The sleeping surface was not a mattress. It was whatever was available: dry grass, animal hides, layers of leaves. Archaeological sites in South Africa, including the famous Sibudu cave excavation, led by researcher Lynn Wadley, have turned up evidence of deliberately constructed sleeping platforms made from plant material, some of which appears to be compacted grass and sedge plants, layered together dating back roughly 7,700 years. The plants selected were not random. Some of them have natural insecticidal properties that would have helped repel biting insects. These people were not just lying down wherever. They were choosing, constructing, managing their sleeping environment with real care. What they were not doing, as far as we can tell, was lying awake, worrying about whether they were sleeping correctly. This is perhaps the sharpest difference between then and now. Sleep anxiety, the specific experience of worrying about the quality or quantity of your sleep and having that worry make the sleep worse, is a modern phenomenon in the sense that it depends on a modern framing. You cannot be anxious about not meeting a sleep target if no such target exists in your cultural framework. You cannot lie awake worrying about REM cycles if you have never heard of REM cycles. That does not mean ancient humans had no difficulty sleeping. They had cold and pain from injury and the low chronic stress of subsistence living. Nursing mothers woke constantly. People with bad teeth and bad teeth were common. Even in the Paleolithic woke in pain. Sleep in the deep past was not an unbroken idyll, but the baseline was different. The baseline was a body whose sleep and wake cycles were governed almost entirely by light and temperature. When the sun rose, the light hit the retina, and the retina sent a signal through the retinohypothalamic tract to a tiny region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the master clock of the human circadian system. That clock had been synchronized by millions of years of evolution to the rotation of the Earth. It was set by real light. Not screen light, not overhead fluorescent light, not the blue wavelength heavy glow of an LED, but actual morning sun with its full spectrum of frequencies. When the sun set, that same system, sensing the falling light, would begin ramping up melatonin production, the chemical signal that tells the body it is time to wind down. In a world without artificial light, this process would have been smooth, consistent, and deeply synchronized across an entire community. Everyone's melatonin would have risen around the same time. Everyone would have felt sleepy within roughly the same window. The social architecture of the group reinforced the biological architecture of the body. Now, consider what happens when you introduce artificial light after dark. The retina receives a signal that looks to the suprachiasmatic nucleus like daylight. Melatonin suppression continues past its natural endpoint. The body delays its sense of evening. The time at which you feel genuinely sleepy shifts later and later. And if you have a fixed wake time, a job, a school, a commute, your total sleep shrinks. And because the REM-rich later stages of the sleep cycle are the ones that get cut off by an early alarm, it's specifically the most cognitively and emotionally valuable sleep you lose. Charles Czeisler, a Harvard sleep researcher who has spent decades studying the relationship between light and circadian rhythm, has called our current relationship with artificial light a radical, uncontrolled experiment being run on the entire human species. His lab's research has documented clearly that even relatively dim indoor light in the hours before bed measurably suppresses melatonin and shifts the circadian clock. The effect is real, it is measurable, and it has been happening at scale for about 150 years. Your ancestors never had to think about light as something to be managed. Light was an environmental fact, not a lifestyle variable. Darkness was not something that happened to you on a camping trip. It was the default. There's one more thing worth saying carefully here. Some of what contemporary foraging peoples show us about sleep is genuinely useful as a comparison. The absence of sleep disorders in Siegel's study populations the smooth synchrony of their circadian rhythms with the light environment, the social architecture of sleeping in groups. These are real data points about what human sleep can look like under certain conditions. But these communities are not your ancestors. They are not frozen in the past. The Hadza have been shaped by their own history, their own evolution, their own circumstances. Using them as a simple window into the Stone Age would be the kind of shortcut that responsible researchers actively resist. What we can say is this: the biology that governs your sleep is ancient. The circadian system you carry, the melatonin response, the temperature-sensitive sleep onset, the social sleep preferences, these all evolved in environments where artificial light did not exist. The hardware is old. What is new is everything you are running on it. So, you still wake up in the dark sometimes. 3 in the morning, eyes open, mind turning over. Your ancient hardware is doing exactly what it was designed to do: break, sleep, register the quiet, assess the world, and decide whether to go back under. For most of human history, you would have simply let it. The question is not whether you can get back to some original sleep. You can't. The world is full of light and screens and alarm clocks and things that genuinely need worrying about. But knowing what the hardware was built for is at least worth something. The 3 a.m. is waking is not a malfunction. It is a very old feature. operating in a very new world. You wake up in the dark. Your body decided it was time. It has been making that decision for 300,000 years.